Hey everybody, this is Minion Soldier and this is the Piracy Show, and today we're going to be talking about my experiences in 3.0 and the 3.0 PTU and kind of getting around and playing with that. Now, I want to start off with a little disclaimer. Of course there's going to be bugs. There's going to be a ton of bugs in the PTU, and yeah, it really did interfere with my gameplay and kind of the things that I was trying to accomplish, but I expected them. I knew they were coming, and I had been in other PTUs, you know, certainly with 2.6 and I think 2.0 as well. So I kind of knew what to expect, and it wasn't that much of a surprise to me. And even though a lot of the things I was trying to do, I mean, in the end, I just kind of said, I just want to take my cutlass and I want to steal some cargo, pick up some cargo, bring it back, sell it. That's all I want to do. Even though I set that fairly modest goal, I still have not accomplished it. It's the bugs have kept knocking me down. But I will say that everything that is in 3.0 right now, if they can get it to work and they can get it to work in a stable fashion, you know, this is a big step forward. It is. And, you know, I don't think that all these bugs are going to be persistent for a long time. I think they're going to be iterated out over time. Obviously, there is work that is left to be done. The Moby Glass is something that I think definitely needs a revisit. Not just because of bugs, but because of basic design. And the way it interacts with navigation, I think, is a little bit cumbersome. But overall, there was a lot of cool shit, and there was a lot of neat stuff to finally have in our hands, to be able to pick up objects and put them down, even though that is kind of sketchy at the moment, at the best of times. If they can get it all to work, I think you're going to enjoy it. And even though I had all these bugs, and even though I kept getting knocked down, I kept loading back in and trying it again because I was having a lot of fun doing it. And I want to say that straight off. But one of the things that the 3.0 PTU has made very apparent is the issue of visibility from cockpits, especially when you're trying to land. Now, when you get into the PTU, if you're not in already, or once it goes live and you try it then, you're going to get missions to land on the dark side of a moon, as I have just gotten here. And when I was talking about the Hammerhead, and I said, you know, that underside cockpit, you're really going to love that underside cockpit in the future. You're going to see that come into play in this video, and why something like that is so important. A lot of people are like, oh, I don't understand. You know, why are you always on this cockpit view thing? Why are you always beating this drum? It's tiresome. Why do we have to keep hearing this? Well, you're going to see why now. And it's going to become very apparent that a lot of these ships were designed, I think, at a time when Star Citizen was more looking at, you're just going to have landing pads wherever you go, and you're just going to do an automated landing or a very easy mode landing. Whereas now we're landing on the rough surfaces on the dark sides of moons, and these ships really aren't built or thought out in a way that kind of makes that easy, or at least reasonable. There should always be a certain level of difficulty. There should always be a certain level of challenge, I think, in a game like this. And I'm somebody who would always be wary of someone saying, oh no, it should just push a button and your ship automatically lands. You know, I don't see it that way. I think we should be doing manual landings for everything. But at the same time, I find that the game's facilities aren't really designed thinking with that in mind. I think that especially when you go out and land on a planet, even with these ships like the Cutlass, which has such an amazing cockpit view ordinarily, and especially in the first iterations, it had such an incredible cockpit view with such small MFDs. You know, these MFDs have now been redesigned to once again try and reincorporate MFDs and make them viable and make them a part of our gameplay once again, you know, trying to do this. And unfortunately, we're now seeing that that sort of creative idealization doesn't match with the reality of the game and the things and the facilities that we need in game to accomplish even the most basic goal of landing a ship on a planet. These are in the way, and they are not really bringing anything to the gameplay table that we haven't already had in the far superior HUD that we used to have in the first iterations of the game before all that information was moved down to the HUDs, basically for subjective reasons instead of, you know, facing the objective reality of the game. Now, this, of course, you know, well, when I said HUDs earlier, I meant when it was all moved down to the MFDs, but realistically, this doesn't mean the sky is falling. It doesn't mean it's the end of the world, but I think what it does mean is that now that we have the proof right in front of us, I think we need to start looking at navigational aids for less than ideal conditions with the game, and certainly landing on the dark side of a moon qualifies as less than ideal conditions. Now, the landing lights on the ships are wholly insufficient for this task. They don't project light far enough to really give you enough detail. So even if you're landing in third-person mode, it's, you know, it's still a crapshoot if you're going to hit the ground or not, because by the time you can see any detail on the ground, you're about 2 meters or 10 feet off of the ground. Well, I think that's a little bit more than 2 meters, but whatever. You're just too close. And so I think that maybe using the infrared and the EM sensors on the ship to kind of create some type of overlay or augmented reality for the pilot that projects in their helmet over the terrain and over the instrumentation within the cockpit and gives you kind of a semi-opaque relief map of the ground all around you, you know, high res up close, low res off in the distance, but gives you a better idea of what you're landing your ship into. I think something like that is, you know, definitely something that we need to look at, and definitely a tool that we're going to need, not in the future, but now in the present and going into the future. This is something that, you know, has been neglected for a while, and now the need is here, but we still don't have the tool. When you kind of look at 3.0, and certainly if you're watching any streamers or if you're watching anybody's videos, you're going to see a lot of people playing the game in third person and showing off the game that way and saying, oh, look at all this, look at all the moons, look at, you know, this off in the distance, look at me landing my ship, look at me walking around, blah blah blah. And when people are showing off a lot of the game that they're showing it off in the third person, because in the first person, sitting in the cockpit is generally one of the worst places to view this game from. And I think that kind of acknowledging that and saying that outright kind of brings this into a really sharp focus, the nature of this problem. Now, like, even the elements that we do have in the HUD, we need to be able to customize them. We need to be able to change them, like the color of this HUD. Now, you might say, oh, why do you need to change the color of the HUD? But let's move to a different environment, and now we see it. Because of, I guess, opacity, luminosity, whatever, the HUD is now blending in and becoming very difficult to read in a different environment. Now, ordinarily, you might be able to just change the color of the HUD or change the opacity of the HUD so that no matter what, you can read it, because it's still a critical navigational tool. More so if it had an artificial horizon, but still a critical navigational tool. But we don't have that feature because each HUD is color coded to a certain manufacturer, and that's the way it has to be for aesthetic reasons. But for practical reasons, a HUD can be rendered completely useless by some of the environments that it's meant to be used within, just because of that choice. And this is kind of where we get into this battle of practicality versus aesthetics, and, you know, we keep seeming to, you know, buck up against this problem, whether it's with the Defender, with the way that ship was laid out and the cockpit views in that, or with many other ships. We keep having the same problem, and I think now we have to look at the solution, because, you know, these ships have been around for a long time. This game has gone so far in development now that, unfortunately, redesigning the cockpits again, I mean, that ship has really sailed. And do we really want to waste all that development time and all of that artistic effort trying to redesign the cockpits to make them basically functional? Now, if this was just a simple flight game, a simple space combat game with no planetary landings, the current cockpits would be all right. They'd be fine. But when you start to bring in planetary landings and all these other concerns, it becomes really difficult to justify these things now. And certainly, you know, if you're landing a Cutlass, it's kind of a problem. But imagine trying to land a Caterpillar in the same environment, and here I am doing the same thing. Now, the ship is lit beautifully. We can totally see the ship, and the ship looks gorgeous. The problem is we can't see the ground. And yes, I'm actually hovering over the ground where I'm supposed to land my ship for this mission. But I have, you know, in the cockpit, I have a horrible view of the situation, and I can't really differentiate the terrain. I'm forced to use third person to actually perform one of the most basic functions a spaceship has, which is landing. Now, Star Citizen is designed to be a first-person universe, right? It is supposed to be played in the first person. We're not supposed to play in the third person. This is fine for making videos and taking beautiful screenshots of things, but the game is supposed to be played in the first person, yet in order to perform the very basic function of landing your spaceship, you're forced to play it in the third person. And I think that that's kind of the final nail in the argument, or in the coffin of this argument. I mean, this kind of closes it out and says, you know, hey, this needs to change. We need some serious navigational tools. And it's certainly for the ships that have yet to be built out, we need to kind of rethink how those cockpits are laid out and how they're built out, because most of these ships are pretty poor in that department. Now, if we switch over to the cockpit view of a Constellation, then we see something totally different, because this is a cockpit view that would actually be useful in this regard, especially if it had some downward facing lights to illuminate the ground. But all the MFDs are on clear glass panels. We can see through them, and we can still see around and see what's going on around us. This is probably one of the best laid out cockpits in the game right now. And it kind of most clearly illustrates, you know, the reverse of this problem, what it's like to have everything you need almost configured the right way. Whereas when we come back to the Caterpillar, it's a different story. The views are obstructed, the MFDs are far less useful, and we just cannot clearly see what's going on around us. Now, if we were to take all this out, the windows are different, the ship obviously has a different shape, but if we take all those MFDs out of it and we kind of put them up on little hanging glass panels around the pilot, all of a sudden we can see a lot more going on around us and down in front of us, and that would help us navigate the ship and most certainly land the ship. Even if the cockpit is off to the side like this, we have a couple of lamps shining down from the nose of the ship onto the ground. It's going to make this ship a lot easier to land and navigate into a safe landing than the way it is now. Now, overall, to wrap things up, I don't want you to think that my takeaway from 3.0 has been negative. In fact, quite the opposite. I have enjoyed playing this game. And despite all the crashes, all the frustrating failures, and all the nonsensical "you fell 5 feet, broke both your legs, and bled to death on the surface of a moon" instances which have occurred many times, maybe something that needs to be dialed back, I still keep logging on. In fact, even making this video, I am on my tablet watching to see if the server's back up so that I can get back in and play some more. 3.0 is a huge leap forward over what we previously had. And even though it may not seem like any individual component that we're about to get is all that big, except for obviously the size of the moons and being able to land on them, all of it brought together still makes for a fun and addictive experience. And I think if they can get all of this to the point where it's functioning stably, even for only 50 people at a time for the next little while, you are going to enjoy yourself, and you are going to have a lot of fun, and you're going to be pleasantly surprised with everything that you see. And it does look fantastic. It absolutely does. But one of the things that I think is holding this back, and we've talked about this for a long time now, is once again these cockpit views. And never has it ever been more necessary to talk about these things than now, when we're actually landing on planets and realizing that, whoops, yeah, we actually do need to see what we're doing. Anyways, that's the show for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.